We're now going to read Genesis chapter 3. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and also gave unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together, and made themselves aprons. And they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden of the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God amongst the trees of the garden. And the Lord God called unto Adam, and said unto him, Where art thou? And he said, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself. He said, Who told thee that thou wast naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree, whereof I commanded thee that thou shouldest not eat? And the man said, The woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat. And the Lord God said unto the woman, What is this that thou hast done? And the woman said, The serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. And the Lord God said unto the serpent, Because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle, and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. And unto Adam he said, Because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree, of which I commanded thee, saying, Thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground, for out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. And Adam called his wife's name Eve, because she was the mother of all living. Unto Adam also, and to his wife, did the Lord God make coats of skins, and clothed them. And the Lord God said, Behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat, and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden, to till the ground from whence he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims, and a flaming sword, which turned every way, to keep the way of the tree of life. Genesis chapter 3. The serpent, or the snake, was more subtle than any beast the Lord had made. Subtle is described as cunning or manipulative, and beast is described as an animal that's difficult to control. So the serpent was the most difficult animal to control based on its cunning or manipulative nature. The serpent approached Eve. Eve was the only creation made from an existing organism, and she had no direct interaction with God. I'm mentioning these two things because that might have been a reason to approach Eve instead of approaching Adam, because the serpent, being manipulative, would seek to exploit any situation to influence man to act against God. So if she had no direct interaction with God, then the serpent could have a direct interaction with her and possibly influence her to act against God. Even though she didn't have a direct interaction, in chapter 2, verse 24, Adam and Eve, or husband and wife, are considered one unit. Eve was fully aware of God's commandment to not eat of the tree of good and evil. The serpent approached Eve and questioned her. So, God told you not to eat of every tree? Eve responded that she was able to eat of every tree, just not of the tree of good and evil. The serpent responded in opposition to what God said, diminishes the severity of the punishment that God told her, or God told Adam and told her, and says that you won't die, but you'll be as gods, knowing both good and evil. So what changed Eve's mind was the offer to be as a god herself. After the serpent told her that, she developed an interest in being like a god and going against God so she can be her own god. The serpent already knew God's commandment when he approached Eve, because there's no way he could have known all this information about the function of consuming the fruit. He wouldn't have known about that outcome without knowing that God specifically commanded man against consuming it. It's a satanic quality to have an aspiration to be like God or to be your own God. The reason why is because it's out of order for us to be our own gods. We were not created to handle the weight of that responsibility, which will be further illustrated throughout this chapter. Man was given dominion over the earth, but he did not create it, and over the earth, over the landmass, because we were not given dominion over the sea. We were not given dominion over the sky. We have access to it, and to an extent, we can navigate, but we weren't given dominion. The death that would occur was the pure creation that man was intended to be, that man already was. It would change if they wanted to become their own gods. They would not be able to exist as that pure creation, not having the ability to choose evil. Because the serpent responded, you'll be as gods, knowing both good and evil. So at this point, they didn't have the ability to choose evil. They weren't created to choose evil, to have that ability. Satan influences man away from God and then manipulates man into believing it's his own choice, his own will. So Eve ate the fruit after being deceived and then gave some to Adam too, convincing him to consume some of the fruit. 3 points about this I'd like to make. One, we don't know what type of fruit the tree of good and evil was. We don't know. It's always depicted as an apple. And the Bible has been so manipulated and so just portrayed in a way that doesn't make sense. For instance, if you pull up any depiction of any of the characters in the Bible, none of them have a hue to them. None of them are brown when Eden is taking place in Africa. The first chapter mentions Ethiopia as being a nearby landmass, but every picture, every depiction of Jesus, every depiction of the characters of the Bible are white. This book is supposed to be about Black people. I don't care what anybody says because it wouldn't have started in Africa if if it wasn't for Black people, if it wasn't about Black people. But this is just yet another thing in the Bible that is being manipulated into something else that wasn't specifically stated. We don't know what type of fruit it was. Number one. Number two, Eve now has the power and ability to influence a man away from God, even if God directly spoke to him. God directly spoke to Adam in person. Adam knew God the Creator told him, and he still acted against God because of his affinity for the woman. Lastly, the food that they ate directly influenced what happened to their earthly bodies. Verse 7, their eyes were opened, and they realized they were naked. So once they received this knowledge that was not meant for them, this knowledge that they were specifically commanded to not consume, they got this knowledge, and the first response is an unhealthy fixation on the human body. A fixation. Once they ate, now they felt differently about the way their bodies looked. Nudity was fine. All the animals were naked. They had been naked all through this time. There was no problem. But now, they believe that, well, now I'm naked. Now my genitals are exposed. I can't be naked like these animals. So, in a response to their new fixation with the human body, they create clothing. Chapter 3, verse 7, they sewed fig leaves together. Sewed means to unite or to fasten with stitches. Some more synonyms for the word sew is to fashion, to adjust, to tailor, to modify. Fashion, clothing. Materials are being used in a way that they weren't supposed to be used. God didn't create. He didn't make creation to accommodate how we feel about our bodies. We weren't supposed to be using this material for fashion, for clothing. That wasn't how God created us to be. But now that we have this new knowledge, now we have to use creation in a way God did not intend. Which is it didn't help manage our preoccupation with the human body. We still have a preoccupation, and we use the materials that God did not make for us to use that way. We use the materials to now help us accommodate the perception we have with our human bodies. So now that this has happened, man was influenced away from God, which changed the nature of what humanity was supposed to be. Because now everything that comes from Adam and Eve, every one of their offspring, now they're going to have to wear clothes. Now they're going to have a preoccupation with their body. Why? Because that's an idea that exists in the world now. Nothing is done with humanity in a vacuum. This was all created for us to work together in concert. That's why when God he created light, he had to create dark, he had to create light, he had to create land, space for plants to grow. So he had to manage darkness and light. He had to manage wet and dry because he had to have plants grow there. This all works together in concert. Chapter 3, verse 8. Adam and Eve heard God in the garden, and they hid. So they attained this God level knowledge, and they weren't prepared to handle it. And they got this knowledge like a God, but when God came, they realized they're not God, like God is God, because you weren't created to be God. So now here comes God, and you know you're not God too. So now there's fear. There's division away from God, hiding yourself away from God, separating yourself from God because of the knowledge that you have now. Didn't create anything. The creator that made, you're taking his creation and using it in a way he did not intend. And then you're going to separate yourself from God? Hiding is motivated by fear, which was not something we were intended to experience. So I just want to recap. After they got the knowledge, an unhealthy fixation with the human body, they have to create fashion to accommodate this unhealthy perception. And now they're separating themselves from God. They feel fear. God called out to them and asked where they were. And Adam responded that indeed he was afraid because he now realized he was naked. God asked Adam in chapter 3, verse 11, "Who told you you were naked? Did you eat of the tree of good and evil?" Adam says that, "Yes, I did eat, but Eve, the woman that you gave me, she convinced me to eat it." God asked Eve, "What have you done?" in chapter 3, verse 13. Eve Eve does take accountability. She says, "Yes, I did eat it, but it was the serpent who beguiled me. The serpent tricked me." And she was right, the serpent did trick her. But how did he get her interested? He got her interested by telling her you could be like God. You yourself, you didn't have a direct interaction with God like Adam did, but you can be like God too. God already knew the serpent's nature, which is why chapter 3 starts out talking about how manipulative he was. So he didn't even question the serpent, he just punished him. And his punishment was physical, restricting the serpent to moving on its belly and eating dust. And then the additional punishment is the active or mutual hatred between the woman and the serpent and each of their offspring. The woman's first punishment is psychological because the first punishment is she's going to hate the serpent, having enmity with God's creation. Verse 16. The second punishment for Eve is physical, psychological, and emotional. Verse 16 says, "I will greatly multiply thy sorrow." Sorrow is defined as distress or happy or sadness, not happiness. Sorrow is defined as distress or sadness. So that's the first part of the sentence. The first part of the sentence is joined by the conjunction and, linking two ideas together. So she's going to have a hatred of the serpent. She's going to have general sorrow, multiply thy sorrow, And then in addition, I will greatly multiply thy conception. So your fertility, I will greatly multiply your ability to conceive. It says here that in distress or in sadness, in sorrow, thou shalt bring forth children. So child rearing will be sad or distressing. The last part of her punishment was psychological or emotional. Because she was created to be a companion to man, now she will have a longing for the man, and the man will rule over her instead of accommodating her emotionally. Eve had to be punished harshly because she was influenced to go against God, because she was talked into and deceived into being like God. She had an interest to be like God, and she used Adam's desire for her against him to act against God. She didn't just eat of the tree herself. She had to influence Adam to do it too. So, because of this imbalance, because man was created with a desire for companionship, and Eve perverted that with her influence because she allowed herself to want to be a god too, she had to be punished harshly. She had to be punished with painful childbirth so she would think twice about using her influence the wrong way. Having no regulation for her, because it only says it's not good for man to be alone. The Bible doesn't say it's not good for woman to be alone. But he had to even create a longing for the man because there wasn't even a longing for the man. So now God is having to create balance. Now God is having to create punishment. He was not creating from a place of having to create punishment. He was creating out of love. But now that this has happened, he's got to restore balance. So Eve had to be punished severely to help restore balance. Verse 17, God punishes Adam because he did not have any self-restraint. He was punished for not having any restraint. He allowed himself to be seduced by Eve, even though God directly commanded him otherwise. God cursed the land. Adam's original job was to maintain the land. And in sorrow or in distress, Adam shall eat from the ground for life. When Adam was created, he was created to maintain the land. He was created to name the animals, to have dominion. But he wasn't created to work from the sweat of his brow. He wasn't created to work that hard. But since you didn't want to have any self-restraint, because you didn't want to have any self-restraint against that woman, you let her influence you against me. Since you want to be like God, well then you can create your own. Create your own universe then. Since you didn't want the universe I gave you provision that was easy. You didn't have to work from the sweat of your brow, but you still wanted to be like God's. Okay. I want to reemphasize because I know how that sounds for a woman to be punished with fertility, with increased fertility. But that's evidenced in the text because Eve did not conceive until after she was kicked out of the garden. That's when she conceived. That's when Adam knew her. So it isn't clear if they were having sex before, but if they were, she wasn't getting pregnant. Her fertility, painful childbirth, that was not even discussed until after this punishment. And again, that was there to help restore that balance, to provide some sort of balance. Because if a woman has a painful childbirth, she's going to be a little bit more selective about what she does with her influence. That's what was supposed to happen. Verse 19, God told Adam that he created Adam from dust and will return to it. In verse 20, Adam gave Eve her name after this, which is, it comes off as petty. After they get in trouble, now you give Eve a name. It was Adam's job to name all the creatures, and Eve is the last creature God created. But the timing of this is quite petty. It's like after they get in trouble and they're going to be driven out of Eden, well, now we'll give you a name. Adam's name was first stated in chapter 2, verse 19, and there was no official naming. I mean, the Bible refers to him as man, and then in the next chapter or in the next sentence, he's just referred to as Adam. But Eve wasn't named until they got in trouble. So I know I called Eve by name, but since we already read it and we know it's Eve, I thought it was appropriate to refer to her as that instead of keep calling her woman. So after they get in trouble, God made clothes from them from animal skins, again, taking materials that he did not intend to use that way. He's got to now take those and use it that way to help accommodate what man has done with his creation. Chapter 3, verse 22, God says, "Behold, the man has become as one of us." Up until this point, the characters in the story are the serpent, Eve, Adam, and God himself. So that is one thing that I want to get more clarity on. Who is God talking to when he's talking in this? He's using these pronouns that refer to a collective instead of a singular. Is this evidence of a Trinity spirit? Is he talking about it that way? But that's what it says, chapter 3, verse 22. Behold, the man has become as one of us. So we were only intended to have the likeness of God. God sent Adam and Eve away from the earth. Humans were different from God specifically because they were pure and they did not have godly knowledge. And humans were different because, secondly, they were mortal. But now that they had knowledge and after that knowledge, they became fixated on their bodies. They had to use materials to accommodate their new mindset in a way that wasn't intended. They separated themselves from God. They became fearful. They blamed each other. Because that's how they reacted to knowledge, God had to do damage control and drive them out of Eden before they got the tree of life. Because if they got the tree of life, then they would become immortal. And if that knowledge that they already received, that godly knowledge that they already got, influenced them to behave in a way that is unholy, it would damage creation even more if they got this new knowledge that wasn't intended. It wasn't intended to be used that way. They had access to the tree of life, but instead of eating the tree of life, they were persuaded to eat the tree of good and evil so they can be like gods. So, to preserve man and earth, God banished them from Eden and added cherubims or angels and a flaming sword to enforce reentry, to enforce preventing reentry. God was creating from a place of purity and love, but now God is having to create punishment, which he didn't intend to create punishment. Again, The idea of duality, the concept of duality is present here in this chapter as well. Duality is the concept of opposing ideals. So in chapter 2, I didn't have this word just yet. So that's why in chapter 2 I kept saying opposing ideas. But opposing ideas, another word for that, or a more concise term for that, would be duality, which illustrates the concept of opposing ideals existing at the same time. So duality would be wet and dry. Duality would be light and dark. So on and so forth. Duality presents itself here in chapter 3. Chapter 3 verse first starts out talking about the snake, that the serpent was subtle, deceptive, and manipulative. The idea of duality illustrated in chapter 1 and 2 is a default worldly condition. So this begins with the subtle serpent, but it ends with chapter 3 verse 24 with the angels or the cherubim enforcing God's law, because they were placed in Eden to reinforce preventing reentry. So the chapter starts out, the serpent was questioning God, diminishing what God said, telling two lies and one truth. But the chapter ended with angels enforcing God's law. I hope you were able to glean a deeper meaning of Genesis chapter 3, and I look forward to discussing Genesis chapter 4.